I want you to just imagine something for a second. Picture yourself as a maritime explorer.
Oh, setting the scene right away. I like it.
Right. So it is hundreds of years ago. You are standing on the deck of this massive wooden ship, gripping the railing, and you are just staring out into these thick, heavy ocean mists.
Freezing cold, probably.
Oh, absolutely freezing. The salt spray is just hitting your face, and then suddenly you spot it, the mists part, and you see land.
The ultimate goal.
Right. You mark it down meticulously, this massive new island to add to the globe. I mean, it's a moment of pure triumph for you.
You've basically immortalized yourself at that point. That was the dream for any explorer of that era.
Exactly. But, well, here's the catch. That land you just mapped, it never actually existed.
Yeah, which is just mind-blowing.
It really is. So today we are going deep into this very real, highly documented maritime phenomenon known as Phantom Islands.
And we should clarify, these aren't just, myths that stayed in storybooks.
No, not at all. We are looking at land masses where the initial sightings were officially recorded. They were physically drawn by cartographers and then desperately searched for by generations of later sailors.
Sailors who sailed to those exact coordinates and found literally nothing but open water.
And we are not talking about, like, a quick mistake that got corrected the next week.
Definitely not. The source material for this deep dive outlines 9 specific Phantom Islands that stayed on official, highly trusted maps for centuries.
Centuries.
Yeah, we have decades and centuries of highly trained navigators routing entire fleets around land masses that were, well, they were basically ghosts.
So the mission for this deep dive is to figure out the mechanics of this. How does a fake island actually make it onto an official map? Why does it stay there for hundreds of years? And what does this whole phenomenon reveal about our incredibly blind trust in authoritative information?
It really functions as this perfect historical case study in how human error gets institutionalized. Because we have this tendency to look at an old map and just assume it represents pure physical geography. But in reality, those documents often represented, well, human psychology, optical physics, and sometimes outright fabrications.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the psychology first, because the earliest Phantom Islands were born entirely out of folklore, right?
Yeah, ancient beliefs literally shaped the physical tools that people use to navigate the world.
Take St. Brendan's Island, for example. The sources talk about this story where around the year 512 AD, this Irish monk named St. Brendan the Navigator goes on a massive ocean journey west of northern Africa.
Right, a famous legend.
Yeah, and he supposedly discovers this incredibly lush, bountiful island. He even preaches to the native inhabitants.
Which, is a beautiful story. It was recorded in the 9th century. And St. Brendan himself was a historical figure.
He actually existed.
He did, and he likely did undertake some really impressive maritime voyages.
Oh.
But the island bearing his name, complete myth.
But up until the 18th century, which is more than 1,000 years after his supposed trip, sailors kept actively claiming they had seen it.
Yeah, and mapmakers kept right on placing it on the charts.
See, that is the part that demands an explanation to me. 1,000 years. You have professional sailors, people whose actual lives depended on accurate navigation, treating an old religious story as a geographical primary source.
It is hard for us to wrap our heads around today.
It feels a bit like, I don't know, using a fantasy novel as the architectural blueprint for a skyscraper. Why were they so eager to take these myths so literally?
Well, we had to kind of less step out of our modern understanding of data here. Today, when we view a map, we think of a satellite image, right?
Right, it's just physical facts.
Exactly. It's a strictly physical representation. But for early map makers, a map was a reflection of a culture's entire worldview. That included its spiritual and religious landscape. In the medieval and early modern mindset, if a culture deeply believed in a myth like St. Brendan's miraculous journey, that belief carried the weight of absolute fact.
So leaving it off the map would be bad.
Leaving it off would have been seen as an omission of a fundamental truth. You'd be considered a bad map maker for ignoring it.
So the map is basically doubling as a theological document. If everyone agrees the island is out there somewhere, you just put it on there.
Precisely. And honestly, this explains the constant shifting of these islands, too. Like, consider the legendary island of Brazil.
Right, from Irish folklore. And just to be clear, totally unrelated to the South American country of Brazil.
Correct. Since the Middle Ages, explorers just swore they visited this island just west of Ireland. and their accounts often featured these wildly fantastical elements.
Like resident wizards. The sources literally mention wizards.
Yes, wizards. The funny thing is, nobody could ever agree on the coordinates. Every new map placed Brazil in a slightly different spot.
See, I would think the shifting coordinates and the reports of wizards would be massive red flags for anyone trying to draw an accurate nautical chart.
You would think so, but it really comes down to the technological limitations of the era. Navigators back then suffered from the longitude problem.
Right, they couldn't figure out east and west.
Exactly. They could determine their latitude, how far north or south they were, just by looking at the sun or the North Star. But determining longitude requires highly accurate timekeeping.
And Marone chronometers didn't exist yet.
They didn't. So sailors had to use something called dead reckoning.
Which is basically throwing a piece of wood over the bow and timing how long it takes to reach the stern just to guess your speed, right?
Yes, it is terribly, terribly imprecise. So imagine you are sailing in the fog, you're guessing your speed, and you pass this large, vague shape on the horizon.
Your brain just fills in the gaps.
Exactly. The folklore tells you the island of Brazil is out there. You see something in the mist, and cognitive bias does the rest.
The sources suggest that for Brazil, they were likely just looking at rockall, which is this massive granite boulder sticking out of the North Atlantic.
Yeah, just a big rock.
Right. And through a thick fog, a giant rock could easily look like a towering landmass. You expect an island, you see a rock, you log an island. But the crazy thing is, they didn't just map positive folklore. They charted nightmares, too.
Oh, the Isle of Demons is a perfect example of this.
Yeah, located supposedly off the coast of Newfoundland. And this one originated from Native American folklore describing an island entirely inhabited by evil spirits.
And Western explorers hear this and just, slap this demon-infested island onto their maps.
Literally. They put it on maps in the early 16th century. And history gives us this incredibly bizarre footnote here. In 1541, a French noblewoman named Marguerite de la Roque was marooned as a punishment.
Right.
And the official colonial record states she was marooned on the Isle of Demons.
Wait, really? The official record?
The official record. Now, she was absolutely stranded on a real physical island somewhere in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but the administrative record logged her punishment in a geographical space that did not exist. The bureaucracy just absorbed the mythology.
That is a staggering blend of reality and fiction.
Someone finally figured out it wasn't there in the late 17th century and dropped it from the charts. But, while folklore is this collective societal belief, some of these phantom islands were far more cynical.
Yeah, they weren't all innocent cultural misunderstandings.
Exactly. Some were born out of pure ego.
It was the pursuit of immortality through geography, really.
Yeah.
If you wanted to guarantee your name would be remembered forever, discovering a new landmass was the absolute best way to do it.
Which brings us to Niccolo Zeno the Younger. He was a Venetian statesman. In 1558, he publishes this grand map of the North Atlantic, and he claims it is based entirely on the newly discovered travel diaries of his ancestors from the 14th century.
How convenient.
Right. Based on those supposed diaries, he places a massive island called Friesland right south of Iceland. But the problem is, his ancestors likely never made those voyages, and Zeno completely fabricated the island.
Just made it up.
Just made it up. Yet Friesland stayed on virtually every major map until the 1660s.
To understand why a total fabrication survived for over a century, you really have to look at the physical mechanics and, the economics of map making during the Renaissance.
Because maps were not easily produced back then.
Not at all. They required engraving onto these massive copper plates. It was astronomically expensive. But because Zeno was a wealthy, authoritative statesman, his map was funded, printed, and distributed.
And once it is printed by an authority, it becomes the truth.
Exactly. Other cartographers couldn't just afford to launch a whole expedition to verify his claims. Verification was way too costly. So they did what made economic sense. They just traced his map.
They copied the engraving.
Yeah, it was basically an analog form of copy-paste. Questioning the map meant questioning the entire established, powerful institution of exploration that funded it in the first place.
Wow. And that desire for glory wasn't just a Renaissance problem either. Fast forward to 1823. We have an American sea captain named Benjamin Morrell sailing near the Antarctic Peninsula. He reports seeing a massive new island and names it New South Greenland. And to this day, nobody has ever seen this landmass again.
Now, Morrell is a fascinating case because we kind of have to weigh two competing mechanisms here. On the one hand, the Antarctic environment is incredibly deceptive. It's highly possible he experienced a fata morgana.
A mirage, essentially.
Right. but a very specific type of complex optical illusion. In polar regions, you often get temperature inversions. That's a layer of exceptionally cold air trapped right under a layer of warmer air.
Okay.
This difference in temperature literally bends the light rays passing through it, acting almost like a massive atmospheric lens. A fata morgana can take a distant flat iceberg and stretch it vertically so that it looks exactly like a towering 4,000-foot mountain range.
That is an incredible visual. So
Yeah.
a crew could genuinely believe they are staring at a massive undiscovered continent when they're really just looking at bent light refracting off a floating chunk of ice.
It actually happens way more often than you'd think. However, and this is key, the sources provide crucial context about Benjamin Morel himself.
He had a bit of a reputation, right?
He had a notorious reputation among his peers for embellishing his logs. He frequently invented these dramatic, heroic details just to make his voyages seem more impressive.
The guy was a known fabulist. So while the physics of a fata morgana provide a really convenient excuse, the historical consensus heavily leans toward him just making New South Greenland up to secure his legacy.
Yeah, he wanted his name in the history books.
And drawing a circle on a map was the easiest way to do it.
It really highlights a huge vulnerability in the system. The entire global mapping enterprise relied on the honor system. When the people gathering the data are motivated by fan or financial reward, the data itself becomes compromised.
It is easy to sit back and judge characters like Zeno or Morel for lying. But the really dangerous territory is when the absolute most respected, meticulous names in history make an honest mistake.
Because when they make a mistake, nobody dares to correct it.
Exactly. Let's look at Isle Philippot. This one wasn't even hidden in the remote ocean. It was placed right in the middle of Lake Superior in North America.
Right in our backyard.
Yep. It appeared on maps in the late 18th century and stayed there until the 1900s. And modern geography confirms there are absolutely no islands in that specific location southeast of Isle Royale.
In surveying, this is what we call a classic data duplication error.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, a surveyor is mapping the shoreline of Isle Royale, or the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and they make a slight miscalculation in their bearings. So they log a piece of the existing shoreline as a completely separate island.
Ah, I see.
And because the surveyor is an official government representative, that log is just integrated right into the master map.
But the most staggering example of this kind of authoritative error comes from Captain James Cook.
Arguably the most meticulous and universally revered navigator of the 18th century. His charts of the Pacific were genuinely revolutionary in their accuracy.
Which is what makes this next part so incredible. In 1774, Cook is mapping the area northeast of Australia near New Caledonia, and he marks down Sandy Eye on his map. Now, we don't know exactly what he saw. Maybe a floating raft of pumice stone from an underwater volcano, maybe just a weird glare on the water. But Sandy Island does not exist.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Just listen to this timeline because it should terrify anyone who works with data. James Cook makes a mistake in 1774. The French finally remove it from their nautical charts in 1974.
That is 200 years.
200 years. 2 centuries of modern, steam-powered, and eventually nuclear-powered navies routing around an empty patch of ocean just because Captain Cook said something was there.
It's unbelievable.
And it gets worse. It wasn't until 2012 that an Australian research ship sailed directly through the coordinates, looked around, and officially undiscovered Sandy Island. 2012. We had smartphones, we had global satellite coverage, and yet if you opened Google Earth in 2011, you would see a dark polygon indicating a landmass at those exact coordinates. How does an 18th century typo survive into the era of satellite mapping?
Well, it's the ultimate demonstration of the inertia of legacy data. Think about how massive digital databases are actually constructed.
They don't just start from scratch, right?
No, not at all. When organizations built the first global digital maps, they didn't re-satellite map every single square inch of the ocean. They aggregated existing data sets, like the World Vector Shoreline database.
Okay.
And that database had simply digitized older nautical charts.
So they literally just scanned the old flawed paper maps and turned Cook's mistake into a digital polygon.
Yes. The computer just assumed the historical data was accurate. And because there was no real economic incentive to send a research vessel out to an empty, unremarkable patch of the Pacific just to verify a tiny speck, the data just sits there.
It just lives on.
It gets copied from one database to the next, from the naval charts to the digital vectors, right to your smartphone app.
If Captain Cook can be wrong for 238 years, It really makes you rethink the foundations of the information we interact with every single day. Just the sheer volume of legacy data we inherit and never verify because it would be, too expensive or time-consuming.
And this introduces a massive psychological hurdle, too. When a piece of information, like an island, is deeply ingrained in our official records for centuries, its sudden absence causes intense psychological friction.
Cognitive dissonance.
Exactly, cognitive dissonance.
Because when the map says there's an island and your modern sonar says there is just thousands of feet of open water, people do not handle it well.
No, they don't.
They do not just calmly admit the map was wrong. They invent the most elaborate, wild theories to explain where the physical island went.
We see this so clearly with Bermeja.
Bermeja is a brilliant example. It was a small island supposedly southwest of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. And unlike some of the earlier islands that bounced all over the coordinates, Bermeja had a remarkably consistent location on old maps.
Right, from the 16th century all the way through the 20th century.
Yeah. That consistency gave it immense credibility. People assumed that if it was in the exact same spot on every map for 400 years, it absolutely had to be real.
But when extensive, highly funded maritime studies went out there in 1997, and then again in 2009, they found absolutely no trace of it.
None. And we see the exact same pattern with Thompson Island in the South Atlantic, down between South America and South Africa. First reported by a whaling captain named George Norris in 1825.
Right.
It appeared on official maps well into the 1950s. Then nobody could find it. So the islands are missing. The map makers panic. Cue the elaborate excuses.
The theories get pretty wild.
They do. For Thompson Island, actual scientists theorize that a massive underwater volcanic eruption must have blown the island to pieces, just swallowing it whole into the ocean.
Which, to the general public, sounds somewhat plausible, right?
Yeah.
The ocean floor is geologically active. Volcanic islands do occasionally form and collapse.
But the theories surrounding Bermeja go entirely off the rails. Sure, some people claimed a volcano sank it, but others went much, much further. And just as a reminder, we are strictly conveying the claims in the source material here, not endorsing them.
Right, of course.
During this time, Mexico was trying to establish its 200 nautical mile economic zone for oil drilling in the Gulf. If Bermeja existed, it extended Mexico's oil rights significantly.
Okay.
When the island vanished, some people seriously suggested that the CIA secretly deployed explosives to blow the entire island off the face of the earth just to protect United States oil claims.
It is a stunning leap of logic. And the scientific record dismantled both of these theories effortlessly.
How so?
Well, during the 1997 survey of Thompson Island, researchers didn't just look at the surface. They measured the bathymetry, the depth of the ocean floor. At the exact coordinates where the island was supposed to be, the ocean is nearly 8,000 feet deep.
Wow.
There is no shattered volcanic caldera. There is no sunken landmass. It's just a flat, abyssal plain.
Which means the stark, undeniable reality is that neither Bermeja nor Thompson Island ever existed in the first place. Some whaling captain made a mistake in 1825, and a Spanish cartographer made a mistake in the 1500s. That's it.
Just human error.
So what does this all mean? Why on earth would our brains rather believe in a covert CIA strike force vaporizing a landmass than just admit the map was wrong?
It really comes back to that cognitive dissonance. When humans are faced with a conflict between an authoritative document they have trusted their entire lives and a new physical reality, it's physically uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We have this dunkly documented psychological preference for complex, dramatic narratives over the simple, mundane, and honestly often embarrassing truth of human error.
It feels infinitely better to be the victim of a vanished island or a grand conspiracy than to admit you're the fool who spent 400 years meticulously charting a typo.
It is the exact same mechanism behind the Mandela effect. We would rather believe the universe has fractured into parallel dimensions than admit our own memory is fallible. We prefer a reality where the data is always right, even if it means inventing a catastrophic event to explain its absence.
We want the wizard, we want the underwater volcano, we want the espionage. We just don't want to admit we copied the wrong coordinate. It is such a fascinating look at how our brains process failure.
And it is a very necessary reminder of the fragility of our recorded knowledge.
Right.
We have spent this deep dive tracing the evolution of institutionalized errors, right? We have seen how the spiritual fervor of the Middle Ages allowed monks and demons to dictate physical geography. We have observed how the massive economic barriers to publishing maps in the Renaissance allowed the egos of men like Zeno and Morel to fabricate reality without challenge.
We've explored the optical physics of polar mirages, and we've unpacked the terrifying inertia of legacy data that kept Captain Cook's mistake on a digital satellite map until 2012.
So the real takeaway for you listening here is about the nature of verification. The next time you are blindly following a blue GPS line on your phone, or you are looking at a massive historical data set in your own industry, remember Sandy Island.
That's a great point.
Just because something is printed in a textbook or coded into an enterprise software system or officially mapped by a globally recognized institution does not mean it is an absolute reflection of reality.
Every piece of data has an origin point, and sometimes that origin point is just an exhausted sailor guessing his speed in the fog.
Exactly.
It leaves me with one final thought to ponder long after we wrap up today. If massive physical land masses, literal mountains and beaches, could be entirely fabricated and universally believed for centuries simply because they were stamped onto authoritative parchment, what widely accepted facts embedded in our modern digital maps, our AI training models, and our vast corporate data repositories are actually just 21st century phantom islands? What data points are we currently navigating our lives around, just patiently waiting to be undiscovered? Keep your eyes on the horizon.